People like you don't belong here. This food isn't for your kind." That's what the 16-year-old kid screamed at me when he snatched my groceries right in the middle of FreshMart. His mother, a classic Karen, immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Send the police now. A dangerous man is threatening my son." She kept yelling about how her family had run this neighborhood for 3 generations, that I would regret ever showing up here. But here's the thing. She had no idea who I was. The police cars she demanded, every single one of them answered to one person. And when the 911 dispatcher realized that the person was me, well, let's just say, karma was about to clock in. Let me take you back to how it started. Saturday evening, 6:47 p.m. FreshMart grocery store on the corner of Maple and 3rd. I had been in Maplewood for exactly 6 weeks, and this was supposed to be a simple grocery run. Gray hoodie, jeans, sneakers, looking like any other resident doing their weekend shopping. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I pushed my cart through the produce section, picking up apples, vegetables, and a couple of boxes of cereal. The store hummed with the usual suburban rhythm, families finishing up before dinner, couples debating what to cook. I had just placed a bag of Honeycrisp apples into my cart when I noticed movement from my peripheral vision. A group of teenagers, 3 boys, walking through the aisle with that particular swagger that comes from never being told no. The one in front was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a designer jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. His eyes landed on my cart, then on me. He walked straight toward me, and before I could process what was happening, his hand shot out and grabbed the bag of apples right out of my cart. Then he reached back in and took 2 boxes of cereal. His friends erupted in laughter, one of them filming on his phone. The kid tossed the apple bag to his buddy like a football, then turned back to face me with a smirk that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of household he came from. I kept my voice level. "Those are my groceries. Put them back." He just stood there, arms crossed, chin tilted up, waiting, not for an answer, for a reaction. I gave him nothing. My hands stayed relaxed at my sides, my breathing steady, my face neutral. The absence of the response he wanted seemed to irritate him more than any words could have. His smirk flickered into something harder, meaner. He opened his mouth to escalate, but a voice cut through before he could. "What are you doing to my child?" A woman in her early 50s came rushing down the aisle, blonde hair perfectly styled, clothes that screamed old money. The moment she saw me standing near her son, her face contorted into theatrical fear. "Don't you dare touch him!" I was standing 5 feet away, hands visible, completely still. "Ma'am, your son just took items from my shopping cart. I'm asking him to return them." She didn't acknowledge a single word. Her hand was already fishing for her phone from her designer purse. "I'm calling the police. This man is threatening my son." She dialed 911, and I watched her voice shift into a trembling, frightened tone. "Yes. Hello, I need police at FreshMart on Maple Street immediately. There's an aggressive man here threatening my teenage son. Please send someone quickly." She gave them a description, emphasizing certain details in a way that made my jaw tighten. I unclenched it deliberately, rolling my shoulders once to release the tension. Control. That was the only currency that mattered right now. Tyler, as I would later learn his name, stood behind his mother, clutching my groceries like trophies. A crowd had formed around us now, maybe 15 people, their faces a mix of uncertainty and morbid curiosity. Some had their phones out, others whispered to each other, already forming judgments based on nothing but optics. The woman noticed her audience and leaned into the performance, dabbing at her eyes, one hand pressed to her chest. "My family has been in Maplewood for 3 generations, she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My late husband was vice chairman of the town council. I sit on the HOA board, and I will not allow people to come into our community and threaten our children." One statement. That was all it took to establish the power structure she believed protected her. She turned to me, voice dropping to a hiss. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I said nothing. Instead, I let my eyes drift up to the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. The small red light blinked steadily, recording everything. The angle was perfect, capturing the entire produce section. My cart, her son, all of it. The woman caught my glance and scoffed. "That won't help you. The police will believe me. They always do." My right hand moved to the inside pocket of my jacket, fingers brushing against the familiar weight of cold metal and embossed leather. The shape was distinct, unmistakable to anyone who knew what a law enforcement badge felt like. I let my hand rest there for just a moment, then dropped it back to my side. Not yet. She turned to comfort her son with exaggerated maternal concern, promising him that Mommy would handle everything, that this man would never bother anyone in their neighborhood again. I remained exactly where I was, watching, waiting, letting the evidence accumulate frame by frame on that security camera above us. The distant wail of sirens began to grow closer, cutting through the ambient noise of the store. The woman's face lit up with triumph. She straightened her posture, smoothed her hair, and prepared herself to greet her rescuers. "You hear that?" she said, turning to face me one last time. "That's the sound of your consequences arriving." A few people in the crowd murmured their agreement. Others looked less certain, glancing between her theatrical display and my complete stillness. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began to flash through the store's front windows. The woman smiled, and in that smile was every ounce of privilege she had accumulated over 52 years of never being told no. She had no idea how right she was about consequences, just not in the way she expected. The patrol car pulled into the FreshMart parking lot at 7:03 p.m., lights still flashing, but sirens now silent. Through the store's front windows, I watched a uniformed officer step out, adjusting his duty belt as he approached the entrance. I recognized the walk before I saw the face. Sergeant Mike Holloway, 8 years on the force. Solid record. By the book. He had been one of the first officers I met when I took over 6 weeks ago. The automatic doors slid open, and he stepped inside, eyes scanning the scene with practiced efficiency. The crowd parted for him. Deborah Whitmore rushed forward immediately, heels clicking against the linoleum. "Officer, thank God you're here. That man threatened my son. I want him arrested immediately." Holloway held up one hand, stopping her mid-stride. "Ma'am, please give me a moment to assess the situation." His gaze swept the room. I, standing motionless by my cart. Tyler, still holding my cereal boxes. The bag of apples tucked under his arm. The security camera is blinking red in the corner. I saw the exact moment recognition flickered across his face. Subtle, a slight widening of the eyes, a half-second pause in his breathing. Then it was gone, buried under professional neutrality. The store manager walked over, a heavy-set man named Frank Morrison, who had clearly dealt with enough customer disputes to recognize a complicated situation. He looked at Tyler, specifically at the groceries still clutched in the boy's arms, then up at the security camera I had mentioned earlier. "Tyler," Frank said slowly, "are those items from this gentleman's cart?" Tyler's smirk wavered. His mother cut in before he could respond. "My son would never steal. This man is lying." But something shifted in Tyler's body language. His eyes darted toward a nearby shelf, and when he thought the attention had moved elsewhere, he quietly placed the bag of apples behind a row of canned goods, trying to hide the evidence. The security camera caught every second of it. Frank noticed too. His expression didn't change, but he took a small step back, distancing himself from whatever was about to unfold. A pressure point. He knew something was wrong, and he was choosing his position carefully. An elderly woman near the back of the crowd shook her head slowly, muttering to the person beside her. The tone carried across the space. Exhaustion, like someone watching a scene they had witnessed too many times before. She caught my eye for a brief moment, and there was something in her expression that looked almost like recognition, not of my face, but of the pattern. Deborah was still addressing her audience, voice pitched for maximum sympathy. "My family has been in Maplewood for 3 generations. My late husband was vice chairman of the town council. I sit on the HOA board. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know exactly what kind of person this man is." One declaration, every threat wrapped into a single statement. I let the silence stretch, let her words hang in the air where the security camera could preserve them. She was constructing her own indictment, brick by brick, and she had no idea. Holloway stepped between us, his posture shifting into something more formal. "Ma'am, I need to speak with both parties, starting with identification." He turned to me, and I watched him steel himself before speaking. "Sir, may I see your ID?" I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed past the cold metal, past the embossed leather, and retrieved my driver's license instead. Not yet. I handed it over. Holloway looked at the name. Daniel James Carter. 147 Oakwood Lane, Maplewood. He looked at my face, then back at the name. His thumb pressed against the edge of the card, knuckles whitening slightly. Deborah craned her neck, trying to see. Well, who is he? Is he a criminal? I knew something was wrong with him the moment I saw him. Holloway didn't answer. His radio crackled to life, and he stepped away, turning his back to the crowd. I couldn't make out the dispatcher's words, but I saw his shoulders lock. When he returned, something fundamental had changed in his bearing. The casual confidence was gone. In its place was careful precision, every word measured before it left his mouth. "Ma'am," he said to Deborah, "I'm going to need a detailed statement about exactly what happened tonight." Deborah beamed, interpreting this as victory. "Of course, officer. This man came out of nowhere and started threatening my son. Tyler was terrified. We're the victims here." Holloway wrote in his notepad, but his pen moved too slowly, his eyes lifting to meet mine between sentences. Waiting. The radio crackled again. This time, the dispatcher's voice came through clearly, each word clipped and deliberate. "Unit 7, confirm your 20. Running priority verification on individual Daniel James Carter. Advise you to stand by. Do not proceed until confirmation is received." Priority verification. That phrase hung in the air. Deborah scoffed impatiently. "What is taking so long? Why haven't you arrested him yet?" Holloway's pen stopped moving. He stared at his notepad for a long moment, then slowly closed it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping half an octave, "I need you to remain calm, and let me handle this according to procedure." Deborah's smile flickered. "Procedure? What procedure? He threatened my child." Holloway turned to face me fully, and I watched him struggle with what he now suspected versus what protocol demanded. His training was warring with the reality unfolding in front of him. "Sir," he said quietly, almost reluctantly, "is there anything else you'd like to provide for identification purposes?" The question was loaded. He was giving me an opening, a chance to reveal what he already knew was coming. I met his eyes and shook my head slowly. "The license is sufficient for now." "Sergeant." The use of his rank landed like a stone in still water. Deborah noticed the shift, even if she didn't understand it. "Why are you talking to him like that?" she demanded. "Why are you being so polite to him?" Holloway didn't answer. His radio crackled one final time. "Unit 7, verification complete. Be advised." A pause. "Proceed with caution." The dispatcher's tone carried weight that Deborah couldn't decode, but Holloway could. He turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw the full recognition settle into place. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. "Sir," he said, and the word came out different now, weighted with something that made Deborah's triumphant expression begin to crumble. "I believe we need to have a different conversation." Holloway's words hung in the air. A different conversation. Deborah's face cycled through confusion, irritation, and the first flicker of uncertainty. "What are you talking about? This man is the criminal here. Not me." Holloway gestured toward the customer service desk near the front entrance. "Ma'am, I'd like to continue this discussion somewhere more private." "Sir, please wait here." I nodded. Deborah hesitated, visibly unhappy about losing her audience, but followed him toward the desk. Tyler started to accompany her, but Holloway stopped him with a raised hand. "Just your mother for now." The boy froze in place, suddenly looking far less confident without her protection. He glanced at me once, then quickly looked away, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. The cereal boxes and apples he had taken from my cart were now abandoned on nearby shelves, arranged in a neat row of evidence. The security camera overhead captured all of it, its red light blinking steadily in the fluorescent glow. I watched the exchange from a distance, reading body language more than words. Holloway spoke in low, measured tones, his posture careful and controlled. Deborah's reactions were far easier to interpret. Animated hand gestures, head shaking with increasing vigor, arms crossing defensively over her chest. Then her phone rang, cutting through the tension. She held up one finger to Holloway, the universal signal that this call took priority over everything else, and answered without apology. Her voice carried across the store despite her attempt at discretion. "Yes, I'm still at FreshMart. There was an incident." "No, I'm handling it." A pause. Her tone shifted, becoming businesslike, calculating. "Yes, I know which house. 147 Oakwood Lane, the one we discussed. He's the one who bought it before we could close." my address, my house, the property I had purchased 6 weeks ago. I kept my expression completely neutral, but every word she spoke now had my full attention. "I know we missed the window," she continued, pacing slightly as she talked, "but this could work in our favor. If we establish that he's a problem, that he's dangerous to the community, the pressure alone might push him out. You remember how the Patterson family folded after 3 months of complaints." She glanced back toward me, lowering her voice, but not nearly enough. "The development deal depends on acquiring that lot. Whitmore Associates needs this to go through. I've done it before with the others. HOA violations, noise complaints, whatever it takes." She ended the call and turned back to Holloway, her composure fully restored, completely unaware that she had just confessed to a pattern of harassment within earshot of multiple witnesses and at least 3 cell phones still recording. The elderly woman I had noticed earlier, the one who had shaken her head with such weary recognition, was now watching Deborah with an expression that had hardened into something resembling resolve. She made her way through the thinning crowd and stopped beside me, keeping her voice low. "I'm Gloria Jenkins. I've lived next door to that woman for 20 years. I turned to face her, matching her quiet tone. "You've seen this before." It wasn't a question. Gloria let out a soft, humorless laugh. "More times than I can count. 3 families in the past 3 years alone, all pushed out the same way. First the 911 calls for suspicious activity, then the HOA complaints, then the whispers that drive down their willingness to stay. By the time she's finished, they're desperate to sell." She paused, her eyes still fixed on Deborah's back. "And her nephew's company is always waiting with an offer below market value. It's not prejudice for its own sake. It's a business model." I absorbed this, fitting it into the picture forming in my mind. Deborah Whitmore was not merely a bigot with a telephone. She was a predator operating a system, using fear and bureaucracy as tools to displace families and profit from their departure. Gloria glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "I should have spoken up years ago, but she has connections everywhere. HOA board, town council, even some of the local officers. The last family who tried to fight back, she threatened with a defamation lawsuit they couldn't afford." Her voice dropped even lower. "I've been a coward, but something tells me you're different." Before I could respond, Holloway returned, leaving Deborah still occupied with another phone call. He positioned himself close enough that our conversation would stay private. "Sir, I've requested a second unit to help manage the scene. Given the circumstances, I want to handle this strictly by procedure." I nodded, then asked quietly, "Sergeant, how many times has Mrs. Whitmore called 911 in the past 6 months?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated, then pulled out his department phone and scrolled through the dispatch records. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read, 11 times since June. All from this number. All classified as non-emergency situations after initial dispatch. 11 calls in 6 months. And based on what Gloria had told me, that was only a fraction of the total pattern. "What were the calls for?" I asked. Holloway scrolled further, his frown deepening with each entry. Suspicious person reports, mostly. A noise complaint that wasn't substantiated. 2 wellness checks that the subject said were completely unnecessary and unwanted. He looked up at me, and I could see the realization settling behind his eyes. "Sir, this is starting to look systematic." Gloria, who had remained nearby, spoke up. "If you searched back further, you'd find dozens more. She's been doing this for years, and no one has ever stopped her." Deborah ended her second call and strode back toward us, her confidence fully restored, her posture radiating the certainty of someone who had never lost a confrontation in her life. "Officer, I've spoken with my attorney. I want to formally press charges against this man for harassment and intimidation. I want a restraining order filed by the end of business tomorrow, and I want him escorted out of this store right now." She turned to face me directly, her lip curling with contempt, stepping closer than social boundaries would normally allow. Her voice dropped to a hiss meant only for my ears. "I don't know who you think you are, but you made a serious mistake coming to my neighborhood. By this time next week, you'll be begging to sell that house and disappear from Maplewood forever." She stepped even closer, close enough that I could smell expensive perfume masking something desperate underneath. "I've broken stronger people than you. I'll bury you so deep in legal complaints and HOA violations that you won't be able to afford groceries, let alone your mortgage payments. This is my town, my territory, and you are absolutely nothing here." I let her finish, Let every threat register. Let the security camera capture her aggressive posture, her invasion of my personal space, her words dripping with intimidation. Then, without changing my expression, I reached into my jacket pocket. This time, my fingers moved past the driver's license and closed around the cold metal and embossed leather that had defined my career for 18 years. I pulled the badge from my jacket pocket and held it at chest level, letting the overhead lights catch the polished metal surface. The embossed seal of Maplewood Police Department gleamed under the fluorescent glow. Above the seal, 3 words that changed everything, Chief of Police. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Every conversation stopped. Every phone that had been recording seemed to freeze in place. Deborah's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her eyes fixed on the badge, then moved to my face, then back to the badge, as if her brain was struggling to process information that contradicted everything she believed. Tyler went completely pale near the shelves where he had abandoned my groceries. A bag of candy slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. Holloway straightened his posture and clasped his hands behind his back, assuming the formal stance of an officer in the presence of his commanding officer. "My name is Daniel Carter," I said, my voice calm and clear enough to carry. "Chief of Police, City of Maplewood, appointed 6 weeks ago." I returned the badge to my pocket. The reveal was complete. Now came the consequences. Deborah's voice came out thin and strained. "This is ridiculous. Anyone can buy a fake badge. Officer, you cannot possibly believe this man is your superior." The words hung in the air, their implication clear to everyone. Holloway's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, this is Chief Daniel Carter. I report directly to him. I can confirm his identity without question." Deborah took an involuntary step backward, her heel catching slightly on the polished floor. It was small, but I caught it. The first physical retreat she had made all evening. Her body understood what her mind refused to accept, but instead of recalibrating, she doubled down. That was her mistake. "Fine. So he's the police chief. He's still a citizen. He still threatened my son. Badge or no badge, I have every right to file a complaint." I nodded once. "You're correct. I'm subject to the same laws as anyone, which is why this will be handled entirely by procedure." I turned to Holloway. "Sergeant, secure all security footage from cameras covering this section. I want the 911 recording from tonight's call preserved as well." Holloway nodded sharply. "Yes, sir." No hesitation, no questions. Deborah's confidence wavered visibly. "Evidence of what exactly?" "The evidence will prove this man harassed my child." I let a pause stretch before responding. "The evidence will show the truth. That's all that matters." Frank Morrison approached, tablet in hand, though his expression carried something more complicated than simple cooperation. He glanced at Deborah, then at me, clearly uncomfortable with the position he found himself in. "Chief Carter, I've pulled the relevant footage. 4 camera angles on the produce section. Camera 3 has a direct view of the initial incident." He hesitated before continuing. "Audio is clear enough to hear the exchange." Deborah lunged toward him. "Frank, let me see that. I've shopped here for 30 years. My family keeps this store profitable." Frank stepped back, keeping the tablet out of reach, but his voice carried reluctance rather than righteousness. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've known you a long time. I don't want to be in the middle of this, but I saw what happened tonight, and I can't pretend otherwise." He looked at me with an expression that said he wished he were anywhere else. "I'm cooperating because I have to. That's all." It wasn't a heroic stand. It was a man protecting himself by telling the truth, nothing more. Deborah spun toward him with barely contained fury, but before she could speak, her voice cracked, just slightly, a fracture in the armor she had worn so confidently all evening. "Whose side are you on?" The question came out higher than intended, almost plaintive. Frank just shook his head and stepped further away, unwilling to engage. I addressed Holloway directly. "Based on what occurred tonight, there are potential violations that need formal review. Assign this to a detective with no connection to me. I'm recusing myself from all decisions in this matter." Holloway pulled out his notepad. "Understood. Sir, I'll have Detective Warren take point first thing tomorrow." Deborah seized on this immediately. "You see conflict of interest. He can't be involved. This whole thing should be thrown out." I turned to face her. "I won't be involved in the investigation or any charging decisions, but evidence preservation is standard procedure for any incident. That applies regardless of who the parties are." I paused, letting my next words land with full weight. You should also know that false statements to emergency services carry serious consequences, as does repeated misuse of the 911 system. Deborah's face drained of color. The shift was dramatic. Red fury replaced by ashen realization in the span of a single breath. Behind her, Tyler looked like he might collapse. The crowd had grown again, drawn by the spectacle of watching power dynamics reverse in real time. Gloria Jenkins stood at the edge of the gathering, arms folded, watching with an expression caught between satisfaction and exhaustion. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small nod, not a celebration, acknowledgement. She would be there when her testimony was needed. Deborah made one final attempt to regain footing, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. "You can't treat me like this. My husband was Harold Whitmore. My family has been in Maplewood for 3 generations. I have friends on the town council. By tomorrow, everyone who matters will hear about how you've humiliated me tonight." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband passed away 3 years ago, and this town was built by many people." I held her gaze steadily. "Your connections won't change what the cameras recorded. The only thing that matters now is evidence." She opened her mouth to respond. Nothing came out. Her lips moved slightly, forming the beginning of words that never materialized. For the first time since I had encountered her in the produce aisle, Deborah Whitmore stood completely silent, not strategically quiet, not pausing for effect, genuinely, utterly, without words. The woman who had commanded every room she entered, who had weaponized her voice and her connections and her certainty for decades, could not produce a single sound. Tyler remained frozen by the shelves, unwilling to approach his mother, unwilling to flee. The candy he had dropped lay forgotten at his feet. Around us, the crowd began to murmur, processing what they had witnessed, already crafting the stories they would tell. Holloway waited at a respectful distance, notepad ready, professionally patient, and I simply stood there, letting the silence do what words never could, letting her feel the weight of a world that had suddenly stopped bending to her will. 48 hours after the incident at FreshMart, I sat in my office at Maplewood Police Department with 3 thick folders spread across my desk. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across pages filled with names, dates, and patterns that painted a picture far darker than a simple grocery store confrontation. Sergeant Holloway stood on the other side of the desk, having just completed his preliminary investigation. He had worked through the weekend without complaint, pulling records, cross-referencing data, compiling everything according to procedure. The weight of what he had found showed in the tightness around his eyes. He was not a man who delivered bad news lightly, and what he had uncovered was very bad news indeed. "Walk me through it," I said, opening the first folder. Holloway did not start with numbers. He started with a name. The Henderson family moved to Maplewood in 2022. The first 911 call against them came 6 days after they unpacked. Suspicious activity. Officers found nothing. 3 more calls over the next 4 months. They sold their house in August that year. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The Okonkwo family, the Ramirez family, the Pattersons, same pattern. New minority residents, immediate 911 calls, escalating complaints. All of them are gone within 6 months. He placed a single sheet of paper on my desk. 47 calls total over 18 months. Every single one was classified as non-emergency after dispatch evaluation, and every single person she reported as suspicious was either a minority resident or a service worker. I stared at the number. 47. Nearly 3 fabricated emergencies per month, each one a weapon aimed at someone who had done nothing wrong. "The financial connection?" I asked. Holloway's jaw tightened before he answered. "Whitmore Associates, her nephew's company. She holds a 15% stake as a silent partner." He pulled out a second document. 7 of the 8 families who left had their homes purchased by Whitmore Associates. Every single purchase was below market value. Estimated total profit over 3 years, conservatively, $1.2 million. He stopped there, but the implication hung heavy between us. This was not prejudice. This was predation. Racism weaponized for profit. The 911 system turned into a tool for financial extraction. I closed the folder and leaned back, feeling the scope of it settle into my bones. A knock at the door broke the silence. Ruth Patterson stepped inside, holding a manila envelope against her chest like armor. The 911 dispatcher who had been on duty the night of my encounter with Deborah Whitmore. 20 years on the job. She looked like someone who had not slept well in days. "Chief Carter, I need to show you something." She did not wait for permission. She crossed to my desk and spread the contents of her envelope across the surface. Printed emails, handwritten notes, a flash drive. I've tried to flag her calls 3 times over the years. 3 times I was told to drop it. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "The last time, she called my supervisor directly. I was written up for being uncooperative with a concerned citizen." She met my eyes. She also left me a voicemail threatening to have me fired if I ever questioned her calls again. I saved it. I've been saving everything, waiting for someone who would actually listen. I looked at the documents, then at Ruth. The risk she was taking was not small. Deborah Whitmore had connections, influence, a history of destroying people who challenged her. "You're willing to go on record?" Ruth nodded once, firmly. "I should have done this years ago. I was afraid, but watching her lie at FreshMart, knowing she had done it to dozens of people who had no way to fight back." She straightened. "I'm done being a coward." After Ruth left, Holloway gathered the folders while I processed the full picture. He paused at the door. "Sir, she's already hired an attorney. Word is she's planning to file a complaint against you for harassment and abuse of power. She's not going to accept this quietly." I had expected nothing less. People like Deborah Whitmore did not surrender. They counterattacked. They leveraged every connection, every favor, every ounce of social capital they had accumulated. But this time, she had made a critical error. She had committed her crimes in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, and against someone who understood exactly how to build a case that could not be dismissed or buried. I picked up my phone and dialed Mayor Richard Caldwell. He answered on the 3rd ring, and before I could speak, I heard the distinctive sound of ice cubes clinking against glass. The mayor was already drinking at 10 in the morning. That told me everything about how much pressure he was feeling. "Daniel, I figured I'd be hearing from you." His voice carried the careful neutrality of a man trying to stay out of the crossfire. "I need a community town hall meeting scheduled for Thursday evening," I said. "Public safety and emergency service integrity." The ice clinked again. A long exhale. "Daniel, you know who her friends are. Half the town council has been to her Christmas parties. The planning board chair plays poker with her nephew every month. This could get very political very fast." I looked at the folders on my desk, at 18 months of documented abuse, at the names of families who had been driven from their homes. "Mr. Mayor, transparency is the only path forward. If we handle this behind closed doors, it looks like a cover-up. If we do it publicly, with evidence, the community sees the system working the way it should." Another pause. More ice. "Thursday at 7 p.m. Town Hall Chamber. I'll make the arrangements." He hesitated before adding, "But Daniel, she's going to come for you with everything she has. Be ready for war." I hung up and turned to face the window, looking out at the streets of Maplewood. Somewhere out there, Deborah Whitmore was already plotting her counterattack, calling in favors, shaping a narrative that painted her as the victim. She had been doing this for years. She was good at it, but she had never faced someone with the authority to access every record, the standing to call a public hearing, and the determination to see it through regardless of political cost. On my desk, a small framed photograph caught the light. Denise, Marcus, Ava. The reason I had taken this job was in a town where nobody knew my name. I did not come to Maplewood looking for a fight, but I was not going to watch someone weaponize the system against the people I had sworn to protect. Thursday was 3 days away. By then, every piece of evidence would be organized, verified, and ready for public presentation. Deborah Whitmore wanted a war. She was about to discover what happened when she picked a battle she could not win. The 3 days leading up to Thursday felt like watching a storm gather on the horizon. Deborah Whitmore was not idle. By Monday morning, her counteroffensive was already in motion. Phone calls to every HOA board member, texts to town council contacts, a carefully crafted narrative spreading through every social channel she had cultivated over 3 decades. Grieving widow, protective mother, pillar of the community, persecuted by an outsider with a badge and a vendetta. By Tuesday afternoon, I learned exactly how effective her campaign had been. Council member Patricia Hayes, who had shaken my hand warmly at my swearing-in ceremony 6 weeks ago, crossed the street to avoid me when I walked to lunch. She pretended to check her phone, but I saw her face. Fear of association. Deborah had already made clear what happened to people who stood on the wrong side, but her rush to control the narrative had consequences she did not anticipate. Gloria Jenkins appeared at the station Tuesday evening, moving quickly through the front door as if afraid someone might see her enter. She sat across from my desk with her hands gripped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. "I've been getting calls," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People I haven't heard from in years. The Hendersons, Maria Ramirez. James Okonkwo called from Seattle at 2 in the morning. His time." She leaned forward, urgency overriding her caution. "They're asking if it's true, if someone is finally going to stop her." I waited. Gloria pulled a folded paper from her purse, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on my desk. 3 written statements. 2 are willing to appear by video if we protect their identities. They're terrified of her, even from thousands of miles away. She met my eyes, and I saw something beyond exhaustion, desperation. Thursday is their only chance. If this doesn't work, she'll come for all of us. You understand that, don't you? Wednesday brought Marcus Webb. The Maplewood Gazette reporter walked into the station at 11 a.m. with a recorder already running in his breast pocket. I spotted it immediately. He was not trying to hide it. "Chief Carter, I've received a statement from Mrs. Whitmore's attorney alleging abuse of power and a coordinated campaign of harassment against their client." He pulled out a notepad. "They're suggesting this could be grounds for your removal from office. I'm running the story tomorrow morning, with or without your comment." He paused, letting that land. "The headline right now is, 'Police Chief Accused of Vendetta Against Local Widow.' You want to change that? You've got about 30 seconds. I kept my expression neutral. "There's a town hall meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. All relevant information will be presented publicly. I'd encourage you to attend before you publish anything you might need to retract." Webb studied me, recalculating. "That's not a denial." I held his gaze. "That's an invitation to see the evidence for yourself. What you print after that is your decision." He left without another word, but the threat lingered. Tomorrow morning's headline could poison the well before the town hall even began. Deborah was playing every angle, and she was playing them well. That evening, Holloway and I worked until the fluorescent lights started to hum. The conference room table was covered with documents, video timestamps, and organized exhibits. Everything airtight, every claim documented, every accusation supported. We could not afford a single gap for her lawyers to exploit. At 9:45 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was 3 lines. "Chief Carter, Town Hall parking lot, 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. I have documents her nephew doesn't know I copied. Come alone." I read it twice, then a third time. The phrasing was specific. Her nephew, not Deborah. Someone inside Whitmore Associates. Holloway looked up from his work. "Problem." I handed him the phone. He read the message, his frown deepening with each word. Could be legitimate, could be a setup. "She has resources and motivation to discredit you before tomorrow night." I took the phone back, staring at the screen. The timing was suspicious. The day before the town hall. Anonymous contact. Instructions to come alone. Every instinct I had developed over 18 years in law enforcement told me to be cautious. But another instinct, the one that had pushed me to take this job in a town where no one knew my name, told me that someone was trying to do the right thing and was terrified of the consequences. "Have a plainclothes unit in the area tomorrow," I said. "Close enough to respond, far enough to stay invisible, and run a trace on this number." Holloway nodded, making a note. "And if the source is real, if there's more than what we already have." I looked at the stacks of evidence covering the table. 47 false calls, 7 displaced families, a $1 million real estate scheme built on fear and prejudice. If there was more, if Deborah Whitmore's crimes ran deeper than even this, then the community deserved to know all of it. "Everything comes out tomorrow," I said. "Whatever this source has, we add it to the record." Holloway gathered his materials and moved toward the door. He paused, hand on the frame, and turned back. "Sir, I need to tell you something. My wife's cousin is married to one of the town council members. He called tonight, warning me that supporting you could end my career." He straightened. "I told him some things matter more than career advancement." After he left, I sat alone in the silence. Outside, Maplewood slept, its streets dark, its secrets buried. Somewhere out there, Deborah Whitmore was preparing her own performance for tomorrow, rehearsing tears, practicing indignation, sharpening the weapons she had used successfully for years. My phone glowed on the table. Unknown number. 6:30 p.m. Town hall parking lot. Come alone. Someone wanted to talk. Someone with access to documents that could blow this case even wider open. Or someone was setting a trap that could destroy everything before the town hall began. I picked up the phone and typed a single-word reply. Confirmed. Then I turned off the screen and sat in the dark, listening to the building settle around me. Tomorrow would determine everything. The evidence was ready. The witnesses were prepared. The stage was set. But the person who texted me was a variable I could not control. And in my experience, uncontrolled variables were where cases either broke wide open or fell completely apart. 6:30 p.m., 14 hours away. I intended to be there, and I intended to be ready for whatever was waiting. I arrived at the town hall parking lot at 6:15 p.m., scanning the area as I pulled into a space near the back. The lot was already filling with cars, community members arriving for the 7 o'clock meeting. I spotted Holloway's plainclothes officer in an unmarked sedan near the entrance, positioned exactly where I had requested. At 6:28, a silver Honda Civic pulled into the space beside me. The driver was a woman in her mid-40s, with dark circles under her eyes, gripping the steering wheel as if gathering courage. After a long moment, she emerged clutching a brown accordion folder against her chest. "Chief Carter, I'm Nancy Crawford, office manager at Whitmore Associates for 8 years. She glanced around nervously. "I quit last month. Before I left, I copied what I could." She thrust the folder toward me. "There's a list inside. 12 more families are targeted for the same treatment. But there's one email you need to read before you go in there. Page 14. That's the one that ends her." Inside the town hall, the chamber was packed beyond capacity. Every seat is filled. People standing along the walls. Gloria Jenkins sat in the 3rd row, ramrod straight. Frank Morrison, near the back, was uncomfortable but present. Marcus Webb in front, recorder visible. And in the center of the 2nd row, Deborah Whitmore herself, wearing a black dress and tasteful pearls. Her attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, sat beside him, radiating confidence. Mayor Caldwell opened the meeting at exactly 7 p.m., his voice carrying a nervous edge. "This special session addresses concerns about public safety and emergency service integrity. Chief Carter, you have the floor." I walked to the podium carrying the evidence folders. The room fell silent. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I'm about to present is supported by documentation, recordings, and witness testimony. Everything can be verified independently." I moved through the evidence efficiently, referencing the confirmed findings rather than relitigating every detail. The 911 pattern was already public knowledge after Webb's afternoon article had shifted from accusation to investigation. The financial connections to Whitmore Associates had been outlined in the documents provided to the council that morning. What the room had not seen was the new evidence. I held up a single sheet of paper. "This email was sent from Deborah Whitmore to her nephew Brian Whitmore on March 15th of this year. Subject line, Oakwood Lane Timeline." I read it aloud, letting each word land. "The new owner at 147 Oakwood Lane closes escrow next week. Begin standard protocol immediately. First 911 call within 10 days of move-in. Coordinate with HOA on violations. Target time frame for acquisition 4 months maximum. This one should be easy. They never last long once we start." The room went cold. 147 Oakwood Lane. My address. The house I had purchased 6 weeks ago. She had targeted me before I ever set foot in that grocery store. Deborah's attorney shot to his feet. "Mr. Mayor, I must object. This so-called evidence has not been authenticated. It could be fabricated. My client has a right to examine any documents before they're presented as fact in a public forum." Caldwell hesitated. I responded before he could speak. "The email was retrieved from Whitmore Associates' internal server. The metadata confirms the sender, recipient, date, and time. It has been preserved according to chain of custody protocols and will be submitted to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning." The attorney's jaw tightened, but he had no counter. He sat down slowly, whispering urgently to Deborah. She nodded sharply and rose to her feet. "Mr. Mayor, I demand the right to respond. Caldwell gestured toward the podium. Mrs. Whitmore, you may address the assembly. She walked forward, and I stepped aside. This was the moment everything hinged upon. Deborah gripped the podium, composing herself before speaking. When she began, her voice was measured, almost gentle. I understand why some of you might be concerned by what you've heard tonight. Taken out of context, these documents might seem damning. She paused, letting sympathy build. But I want to remind you who I am. My husband, Harold, served this community for 30 years. When the elementary school needed a new playground, our family donated the funds. When the volunteer fire department needed equipment, we wrote the check. Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. She was finding her footing. I'm not a perfect person. I've made mistakes, but everything I've done has been to protect the community. Harold and I built together. Her voice cracked slightly, perfectly timed. I'm a widow, a mother, and for 6 weeks, I've been attacked by a man who doesn't know our history, our values, or our way of life. She was winning them. I could see it in the shifting postures, the softening expressions. 3 decades of social capital, activated in a single performance. Then she made her mistake. Emboldened by the response, she pressed further. Those families who left, they weren't driven out. They chose to leave because they didn't fit in here. Maplewood has standards. Maplewood has traditions. And frankly, not everyone belongs in a community like this. The shift was instantaneous. The murmurs stopped. Someone in the back drew a sharp breath. Deborah did not notice. She was looking at the sympathetic faces in the front row, not seeing how the rest of the room had changed. I've spent my entire life protecting this town from people who would change what makes it special. That's not a crime. That's called being a good neighbor. Gloria Jenkins rose slowly from her seat, not speaking, just standing. Then the woman beside her stood. Then a man 3 rows back, one by one. People throughout the chamber got to their feet, not applauding, not shouting, simply standing in silence, bearing witness to what had just been confessed. The Hendersons' former neighbors, Maria Ramirez's best friend, a teacher who had watched the Okonkwo children cry on their last day of school. They stood without words, and their silence was more devastating than any accusation could have been. Deborah finally looked around, finally saw what was happening. Her composure cracked. You don't understand. I was protecting property values. I was protecting all of you. Her voice climbed toward desperation. This is my town. My family made this place. I will not apologize for defending it from people who don't belong here. Her attorney grabbed her arm, pulling her from the microphone, but the damage was complete and irreversible. She stumbled off the platform, suddenly diminished, the armor of respectability falling away to reveal something small and frightened underneath. Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat, his voice heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. This assembly will take a brief recess. When we reconvene, we will discuss formal recommendations to the district attorney's office regarding potential charges. He paused, looking directly at Deborah. Mrs. Whitmore, I would advise you to consult with your attorney before making any further public statements. The room remained standing as she was escorted toward the exit. No one spoke. No one needed to. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time, searching the crowd for a single friendly face. She found none. The door closed behind her with a sound like a verdict being delivered. 2 weeks after the town hall meeting, the legal system began delivering its verdict. I sat in my office reviewing the formal charges filed against Deborah Whitmore, each count representing a piece of the pattern we had exposed. The district attorney had moved quickly, motivated by overwhelming evidence and the media attention that had turned Maplewood into a national story. Marcus Webb's coverage had been picked up by outlets across the state. Everyone wanted to know about the widow who had weaponized 911 to drive families from their homes. The charges were consolidated into 3 primary counts: misuse of emergency services, a Class A misdemeanor carrying $15,000 in fines and 200 hours of mandatory community service, filing a false police report, and the charge that drew federal attention: conspiracy to commit housing discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. HUD investigators had descended on Whitmore Associates within days, armed with subpoenas and Nancy Crawford's documents. The federal consequences were still unfolding. The company's real estate license had been suspended. Preliminary estimates suggested restitution to affected families could exceed $300,000. Deborah faced a 5-year ban from any involvement in real estate transactions. Her nephew Brian was looking at potential prison time, but legal penalties, substantial as they were, represented only part of what she had lost. The social collapse came faster and cut deeper. I learned the full extent of it from an unlikely source. Frank Morrison stopped by the station on a Tuesday afternoon, ostensibly to drop off a copy of some additional security footage we had requested for the file. He lingered in my doorway, clearly wanting to say something more. "Thought you should know what happened at First Methodist on Sunday," he finally said. "Deborah's been a member there for 40 years, sang in the choir, organized the annual charity auction." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "She showed up for service like nothing had changed. Walked in, sat in her usual pew, 3rd row center. Nobody said a word to her, not one person. When the time came for the peace greeting, everyone around her turned the other direction. She sat through the whole service completely alone." Frank shook his head slowly. "After the benediction, she tried to approach Pastor Williams. He told her, publicly, that the congregation would be praying for her soul, but that her presence was causing distress to other members. Asked her not to return until she had demonstrated genuine repentance." He met my eyes. "She didn't make it to her car before she started crying. First time anyone's ever seen Deborah Whitmore cry." I thanked Frank for the information. After he left, I sat with the image of a woman who had spent decades building social power, watching it evaporate in a single Sunday morning. Tyler's case moved through juvenile court with less fanfare, but clear consequences. Diversion program, community service, mandatory counseling. The details mattered less than the outcome. He had been withdrawn from Maplewood High and enrolled elsewhere, removed from the environment where his mother's influence had shaped his worst impulses. The reforms that followed were more visible. I attended the town council session where they voted on the new 911 oversight ordinance. The chamber was half empty, nothing like the crowd at the town hall. But Gloria Jenkins was there, sitting in the front row. When the measure passed, she did not applaud or celebrate. She simply nodded once, slowly, acknowledging that something had finally shifted. Afterward, Mayor Caldwell asked her to chair the new oversight committee. She accepted with 3 words: "It's about time." Not everything resolved cleanly. The Hendersons expressed interest in returning, but ultimately decided against it. "Too many memories," they said. "Too much damage that new ordinances could not undo." Maria Ramirez called twice, asking questions about the neighborhood, about whether things had really changed. The second call ended with a long silence before she said she needed more time to think. James Okonkwo never called at all. Some wounds do not heal simply because the person who inflicted them has been punished. Some families, once scattered, do not reassemble just because the threat has been removed. The system had worked, eventually, but the system working did not mean the harm had been erased. 3 families were gone. Their children had grown up in different towns, made different friends, built different lives. No amount of restitution could give them back the years they should have spent in Maplewood. On a Friday afternoon, I found an envelope on my desk with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in uneven handwriting. "Chief Carter, I'm Tyler. I don't know what to say except I'm starting to understand what I did wrong. My mom isn't a bad person, but she taught me bad things. I believed her when she said some people didn't belong here. I know now that was wrong. I'm trying to change. I'm sorry for what I said to you at the store. I'm sorry for what I took. I'm working on being better." No signature, just the letter T at the bottom. I read it twice. The handwriting was shaky in places, certain words crossed out and rewritten, evidence of someone struggling to find language for thoughts they had never been taught to express. A 16-year-old trying to unlearn everything his mother had spent his entire life teaching him. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, beside my badge, beside the photograph of my family. Outside my window, Maplewood continued its ordinary rhythms. Cars passing, people walking dogs, neighbors waving to each other across manicured lawns. The town looked the same as it had 8 weeks ago when I first pushed a shopping cart through FreshMart. But something underneath had shifted. Whether that shift would last, whether it would deepen into genuine change, or fade back into comfortable silence, remained to be seen. I closed the drawer and turned back to the work waiting on my desk. There was always more work. 3 months after the town hall meeting, on a Saturday morning that felt like any other, I walked into FreshMart to do my weekly grocery shopping. The automatic doors slid open with the same familiar hiss. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the same steady hum. I grabbed a cart and pushed it toward the produce section, stopping at the apple display to pick up a bag of Honey Crisps, the same spot where everything had started. A store employee restocking the shelves nearby glanced up and nodded. "Morning. Chief?" I nodded back. "Morning." No drama, no confrontation, just a man buying groceries in the town he had sworn to protect. Frank Morrison waved from the customer service desk as I passed, a simple gesture that carried more weight than he probably realized. This was what normal looked like. This was what I had come to Maplewood to find. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of the wall in my office at the police station. 22 photographs lined up in chronological order. Every chief of police who had served Maplewood since 1952. 22 faces, all of them carrying the same determined expression, all of them white. Holloway had brought my official photograph that morning, freshly framed and ready to be mounted. He stood beside me now, holding a small hammer and a picture hook. "You sure about the placement?" "Sir." I looked at the space at the end of the row. "Position 23. That's where it belongs." He drove the hook into the wall with 2 precise strikes, then stepped back so I could hang the frame myself. I lifted the photograph and settled it onto the hook, adjusting it until it hung straight. My face looked back at me from the wall, badge visible on my chest, expression calm and steady, the first black police chief in Maplewood's 73-year history. Holloway studied the row of photographs for a long moment before speaking. "Looks right," he said quietly. I nodded. "It does." We stood there in silence, 2 men looking at a wall of history that had just been changed, not through confrontation or conflict, but through the simple act of doing a job and refusing to be pushed out. After a while, Holloway cleared his throat. "Sir, I should tell you something. My wife asked me this morning if I was proud of what we did these past few months. Taking on someone like Whitmore, changing things." He paused. I told her I was just doing my job, following the procedure, supporting my commanding officer. He turned to face me. "But between us, yeah, I'm proud." I allowed myself a small smile. "Me too, Sergeant. Me too." That evening, I drove home to the house at 147 Oakwood Lane, the property Deborah Whitmore had targeted before I ever arrived in Maplewood. Denise was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Marcus and Ava were in the backyard, their laughter drifting through the open windows. I stood on the front porch for a moment, looking out at the street, at the neighbors walking their dogs, at the ordinary beauty of a community going about its life. The flag on our porch hung still in the windless air. Beneath it, a small wooden sign that Denise had hung last week. The Carter family, Maplewood residents, not outsiders, not people who did not belong. Residents. I walked inside, closed the door behind me, and sat down to dinner with my family. If this story reminded you that justice exists for those who refuse to stay silent, you are exactly who this channel was made for. Karma Fence brings you real stories of everyday people standing up against abuse, corruption, and injustice. Every view helps us keep these stories alive. Follow along for more moments when karma finally punches in for work.